no movie had ever been this violent.
The often romanticized 1960s saw a period of great change, and Hollywood was faced with a revolution itself in the form of the New Hollywood movement. A key agent of revolution at the movies was Arthur Penn's 1967 crime film Bonnie and Clyde, which changed the makeup of cinema forever. Despite its 1930s setting, Bonnie and Clyde, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, was unmistakably a product and mirror of the 60s. It tapped into the anti-establishment zeitgeist and resonated with youth. The film was commercially successful, making impressive profits on a fair budget, but even more profoundly influential. It hammered the final nail into the coffin of the production code known as the Hays Code, and it ushered in a sexier, more violent cinema full of sympathy for the outlaw. Yale professor Mark Lapadula explains,
The violence in Bonnie and Clyde was something that couldn't be shot until 1967 because they had just developed the squibs to show that the bullets like a zipper going right up his leg and exploding. And they're long dead, but their bodies are still animated by the bullets that are riddling their corpses. Well, when audiences saw that sequence, I mean, that was just something that their just jaws dropped. They were so beautiful, the two of them. They were so young. They were so free.
We got $1.98 and you're laughing.
Just in time for its 50th anniversary, let's walk through what you might have missed about this counterculture classic. While the actual Bonnie and Clyde were active during the 30s, the real Bonnie and Clyde, or the morality of what they did, is not of concern to Penn. This film is obviously speaking about its own time, using this outlaw romance as loose material to represent 60s discontent and dissent. He's reimagining the criminals as a fantastical analogy for 60s youths who didn't want to accept their parents' world. Ivan, CW's father, berates his son for daring to get a tattoo,
You look like trash all marked up like that.
which through no coincidence features love, the buzzword of the 60s, flowers, an integral symbol of the counterculture movement, and doves, the classic symbol for peace. The way the father dismisses the hero and the heroine
Bonnie and Clyde, shoot, they ain't nothing but a couple of kids.
doesn't sound dissimilar from how square elders would dismiss hip youths of the time, who at this point would have firmly identified with Bonnie and Clyde.
We pull for the outlaw. That's something that's very important to the American sort of psyche, the sort of the romance of the outlaw. I think they represent that you're going to live by your own code, and we love that. We love that. We know that anybody who does that, though, especially in movies, they're doomed to a very short reign of being, living by such a code.
Bonnie and Clyde embodies the defining quality of the counterculture, the will to destroy the establishment. The film is about fighting the system in a very literal sense. Despite their humble beginnings robbing grocery stores, the couple quickly move on to the banks. Their reputation as contemporary Robin Hoods is cemented through the scene at the foreclosed property. The couple shows sympathy for its former residents,
Well, that's a pitiful shame.
as does the camera. Clyde fires into the bank sign before letting the farmer and the sharecropper take it out on the sign and the now bank-owned place as well.
We rob banks.
With a casually dropped line, a nod, and smiles, Bonnie and Clyde align their spree with rage against the powers that be, and their sense of solidarity with the common man and the oppressed, crossing boundaries of class and race. We can see the legacy of this moment in a more recent movie like Hell or High Water. In a later hold-up, the Barrel Gang rob a bank full of impeccably dressed people, but let a poor farmer off with his money. They're standing against the broader system of privilege. The key reversal at the center of Bonnie and Clyde is that the violent outlaws are the heroes of the story, while the police emerge as the villains. And it reflected the feelings of the time. The year of Bonnie and Clyde's release, 1967, saw the first time when a majority of Americans considered the Vietnam War to be a mistake. Younger generations saw the military and law enforcement as a force of antagonism and oppression. Violent confrontations with the law became commonplace in civil rights and anti-war protests. The first raid, with its dishonorable tactics,
They're blocking the driveway.
essentially frames the gang's reactions as justifiable self-defense. Captain Frank Hamer is seen not as the legendary Texas Ranger Hall of Famer he was in real life, but as a glory-thirsty bumbler.
He's wearing black, right? Like, when do you usually see the police all in black? I mean, he's clearly the bad guy.
The bank's been offering extra reward money for us, and I think Frank just figured on some easy pickings, didn't you, Frank?
You know, Texas Ranger, you ain't hardly doing your job. You ought to be home protecting the rights of poor folk, not out chasing after us.
He seems to deserve whatever he's getting. And when he goes after the couple, it's not for justice, but out of a personal vendetta.
I don't recollect his last name. Moss. C.W. Moss.
And when they finally catch up to the outlaws, the excessive force and total overkill of that iconic violent scene leaves us with disgust for the police.
That was just something that just seemed so unwarranted. And I mean, that was the point I think the film was trying to, get across. Now the police are acting like greater criminals in the way they're attempting to bring them to justice.
Penn also goes after the media as part of the establishment, as seen when Clyde flies into a rage when a newspaper says he abandoned Buck.
Newspapers. While we're all lying around here near dead, they had us holding up a Grand Prairie National Bank. Guess they hung that one on us just for luck.
Bonnie and Clyde begins almost as a comedy. She catches him clumsily trying to steal her mother's car, but quickly falls for him and escapes into a robbery and a wild ride. For a while, everything they do seems to be a lot of fun. Even the bank robberies have comedic undertones. The first bank they rob isn't really a bank anymore, and the second one has to be reminded they're being robbed.
Yes, there's a stick-up!
All seems to be going so well until it makes a sharp turn downhill, much like the decade of the 60s, which, after the Summer of Love, increasingly descends into violence and paranoia. And what emerges is a cynicism. Even before anything major happens, we get a series of hints foreshadowing their fates. As Bonnie and Clyde run through the golden wheat, a cloud sweeps across the field, casting a huge shadow on the couple and their future. Gene Wilder's character and the gang are having a good time until he reveals his inappropriate occupation.
Hey, what do you do anyhow?
I'm an undertaker.
Get them out of here.
The scene with Bonnie's mother, filmed through a grainy, borderline unreal filter, feels profoundly prophetic.
You try to live 3 miles from me and you won't live long, honey. You best keep running, Clyde Barrow. And you know it.
Clyde doesn't know it yet, but Bonnie does.
This is it.
Near the end, we get more symbols of doom, as the two newspapers next to Bonnie and Clyde are blown away, ecstatic, but going nowhere. Bonnie herself predicts in her poem,
Someday they'll go down together. They'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde.
The film's tonal shift reminds us that while the 60s were a period of economic boom, civil progress, personal liberation, scientific advancement, and fantastic music, they were also full of downers. Bonnie and Clyde's defeatist prescience would be mirrored by the ending of another counterculture classic, 1969's Easy Rider, in which Peter Fonda's Wyatt says,
We blew it.
But what is he talking about when he says they blew it? These films are speaking about a lost opportunity in the 60s, a powerful historical moment when people might have made real lasting change. Yet due to lack of organization, drugs, paranoia, and other obstacles, the counterculture movement let this moment slip away. The outlaw bikers in Easy Rider are blown up by the side of the road, and Bonnie and Clyde will have to face the sad music by the end. The idea of the doomed couple on the run had been done before, but Penn breathed fresh air into the genre at a time when it resonated the strongest, and Bonnie and Clyde would go on to inspire other classics on this theme. The sexual revolution and the gradual demise of the Hays Code resulted in unprecedented frankness about sex in 1960s cinema.
Between The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde, that was the pincer attack that was put on Jack Valenti, and he's going to have to declaw the Catholic Legion of Decency in the Hays office. He's going to come up with a whole new rating system, the MPAA.
The film is suggestive from the very first shot. The camera gradually pulls back, revealing that she is, in fact, in a state of undress, offering Clyde a more explicit view than Walter Neff of Double Indemnity got 23 years earlier. Bonnie and Clyde get intimate on 2 occasions after this. But both times, Clyde can't perform, or in his own words,
I ain't much of a lover boy.
Before this film, physical intimacy couldn't be addressed so directly under the code's tight grasp, which is why we got so much innuendo skirting around the act. Impotence was even less a topic of movie conversations before this point. Even more infamous and explicit is Bonnie and Clyde's unprecedented depiction of violence. Unapologetically bloody, Bonnie and Clyde was condemned by critics on release, and it's frequently cited as the film that opened the floodgates of violence in American cinema. Bonnie and Clyde's violence was in conjunction with other key films. As early as 1960, there was already the bathroom scene in Psycho. And by the end of the decade, directly inspired by Bonnie and Clyde, Sam Peckinpah sprayed bullets into the characters of the Wild Bunch. By the 70s, we got graphic scenes like Sonny's death in The Godfather. But the bullets in Bonnie and Clyde don't just break bodies. They're also a life-sustaining and a metaphorical force. They're a counterpoint to the couple's frustration, a cure for Bonnie's boring life and Clyde's impotence. This is resounding in the scene where Clyde puts the gun right at his groin, which Bonnie suggestively strokes, both beaming with satisfaction. Metaphorically, the link between the gun and the sexual issues speaks to the greater aimlessness and confusion of young people that the film is channeling and expressing. But Bonnie and Clyde is also getting at a more mysterious and primal link between sex and violence, as well as exploring the uniquely American relationship to violence. It's ironic that Penn is using violent heroes to embody a movement that claimed peace as a key mission. The same goes for Peckinpah's Wild Bunch and George Roy Hill's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The American movie mythology, and especially the Western, revolves around this faith in rebirth by violence. Bonnie and Clyde are only able to consummate their relationship after enough bullets are fired. Violence has been the ultimate aphrodisiac.
You done just perfect.
I did, didn't I?
Yet the true consummation of their relationship isn't really their sex scene at all, but their death. The bloodiest climax in cinematic history. In a succession of fast cuts, a number of reaction shots, and birds flying off, Bonnie and Clyde exchange one last look at each other. We see our heroes reach the end of the line in a mix of normal time and slow-motion cuts. The posse walks out of hiding, and the screen abruptly cuts to black. Like Butch and Sundance, Bonnie and Clyde go out in a blaze of gunfire, and together with the gangs of Easy Rider and the Wild Bunch, these counterculture heroes die essentially as martyrs, refusing to renounce what they believe in, fighting the system until the very end.
Better to go out in a blaze of glory, better to be somebody that just supernovas very quickly because you've at least lived it and experienced it than to be somebody that's totally dominated by the man. These are people that express who they really are. But yes, there are going to be some consequences paid because people are going to be after you if you live this way.
Bonnie and Clyde brought about a more violent cinema, though not necessarily in the way it intended to. The violence in the film is painful, prolonged, excessive, and sickening. It upsets the characters and it upsets the audience too. But as violence becomes more commonplace on screen, viewers become desensitized.
All of these scenes were designed to make people sick at the violence. What is sad is that this morphs into, down the line, a kind of acceptance of what violence we see on screen, and we think it's cool, we think it's fun. Our friend Quentin Tarantino makes Pulp Fiction, and accidentally the gun goes off and blows the guy's head off. People found that funny. And see, I find that disturbing.
Oh man, I shot Marvin in the face.
We shouldn't be desensitized to the violence, but I guess if you're exposed to it, you can be sick at first, but you either can't watch it ever again, or if you continue to watch it, you then create a tolerance for it. And that's how that backfired.
While this aspect of Bonnie and Clyde's legacy is complex, looking back after 50 years, it's hard not to appreciate New Hollywood as a time when studios released movies as creative and cinematic, edgy and relevant as this. Bonnie and Clyde was an influential moment in shaping the cinema of today.